Madison Square Garden, 1974. Eric Clapton was halfway through the Layla solo when his E string snapped with a sound like a gunshot. The sound engineer screamed, "Stop the show!" into his headset. But Clapton didn't stop. What he did next, with only 5 strings, made 20,000 people forget how to breathe and proved why they call him God. It was July 19th, 1974, and Madison Square Garden was packed beyond capacity. Eric Clapton was at the peak of his comeback tour after years of heroin addiction had nearly destroyed him. This wasn't just another concert, this was his redemption. Every music critic in New York was there. Every guitarist who mattered was watching. This was the night Clapton had to prove he was still Slowhand, still God, still the best. The set list had been carefully planned. Layla was the closer, the song everyone came to hear. Derek and the Dominoes had broken up years ago, but the song lived on, immortal. When Clapton played those opening notes, the entire arena erupted. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. Clapton was playing his favorite guitar that night, a 1956 Fender Stratocaster he called Brownie. He'd used it to record Layla in the studio. It was part of his sound, part of his identity. The guitar had never let him down, until it did. The solo section of Layla is one of the most iconic guitar solos in rock history. Every note matters. Every bend, every hammer-on, every pull-off has been studied by millions of guitarists trying to capture that magic. Clapton had played it thousands of times, but tonight it had to be perfect. He was 30 seconds into the solo when it happened. He hit a particularly aggressive bend on the high E string, pushing it up a full step the way he always did, and the string snapped with a sharp ping that cut through even the roar of the crowd and the wall of amplification. For a guitarist, this is the nightmare scenario. The high E string is crucial. It's where the highest notes live, where the emotion of a solo comes from. Losing it mid-performance is like a surgeon losing their dominant hand mid-surgery. You can't continue. You stop, you apologize, you change the string, you start over. That's what everyone expected Clapton to do. In the sound booth high above the arena floor, the engineer saw it happen. He watched Clapton's hand recoil slightly as the string broke, saw the severed string curling away from the fretboard like a dying snake. He grabbed his microphone immediately. "Eric, stop! String's broken. We need to pause." The engineer was already signaling to the stage crew. Someone was running toward the stage with a backup guitar. The lighting director was preparing to dim the lights for a graceful pause in the show. Everything was in motion to handle this professional crisis with minimum embarrassment. But Clapton didn't stop. His hand didn't even hesitate. He continued playing as if nothing had happened, but now he was doing something that should have been impossible. He was playing the rest of the solo, a solo specifically written for 6 strings, using only 5. Every guitarist knows why this shouldn't work. Guitar music isn't just about the notes you play, it's about where you play them. Each string has a specific range, a specific tone. The high E string covers notes that technically exist on other strings, but they're in awkward positions, requiring your hand to be in places it's not supposed to be while playing other notes.
Here's the technical reality. When you lose your high E string, you lose access to the entire upper register in the positions where most lead playing happens. Sure, those same pitches exist higher up the neck on the B string, but reaching them requires massive position shifts that leave gaps in the music. It's like trying to type without your index finger. Technically possible, but it requires rewiring decades of muscle memory in an instant. And it's not just about the notes. Each string has its own voice, its own character. The high E string is bright, cutting, aggressive. The B string, even when playing the same pitch, sounds warmer, mellower. To make a B string sound like an E string, you have to attack it differently, bend it differently, vibrato it differently. You're essentially playing a different instrument while trying to produce the same sound. To play a solo written for 6 strings on 5 strings, you'd have to completely reorganize your fingering in real time, find the same notes in different positions on different strings, all while maintaining the same emotional intensity, the same timing, the same feel. And you'd have to do it instantly, without stopping to think, because the band is still playing, the crowd is still watching, and the song can't stop. It's like being asked to rewrite a novel while you're reading it out loud, in a language you're still learning, while running a marathon, blindfolded. But Clapton was doing it. His left hand was moving in patterns it had never moved in before, finding notes on the B string that he'd always played on the E string, shifting positions rapidly to maintain the flow of the melody. His right hand was compensating for the different string tensions, adjusting his pick attack so that notes on the wrong strings still sounded like the right notes. And incredibly, impossibly, it was working. The solo continued, not approximately, not close enough. It continued perfectly. Every note where it was supposed to be, every emotion intact, every moment of the solo hitting exactly as it should. If you had your eyes closed, you wouldn't know anything had gone wrong. But the people who had their eyes open were witnessing something supernatural. George Harrison was standing in the wings, stage right. He'd come to the show to support his old friend. They'd played together in countless jam sessions, had shared stages around the world. Harrison himself was one of the greatest guitarists alive, a man who'd helped invent modern rock guitar playing alongside the Beatles. Harrison saw the string break. He saw Clapton's micro-adjustment, the split-second decision to continue. And as the solo progressed, Harrison's expression changed from concern to confusion to absolute disbelief. He grabbed the shoulder of Carl Rattle, Clapton's bass player, who was waiting for his cue to return to stage. Is he still playing it? The same solo? Rattle nodded, his own face showing shock. Every note. I don't know how, but every note. In the front row, a young guitarist named Steve Vai was experiencing something close to a religious conversion. Vai had skipped school to be at this show, had saved for months to afford the ticket. He'd been studying Clapton's technique obsessively, learning every solo note for note. He saw the string break, and what he watched happen next would change his entire approach to guitar. Vai would later describe it as the moment he understood the difference between playing guitar and being a guitarist. He'd say in interviews decades later, "I thought I knew Layla. I could play it note perfect in my bedroom, but when that string broke and Clapton kept going, I realized I didn't know anything. I was mimicking. He was creating."
The experience haunted Vai for weeks. He went home that night and deliberately broke his high E string before playing solos, forcing himself to adapt, to find new paths. His friends thought he was crazy. His guitar teacher asked if he was okay, but Vai understood something that most guitarists never learn. Real mastery means being able to rebuild your art when it breaks. He wasn't just playing the notes. Vai would say years later in an interview that would become famous in guitar circles. He was recomposing the solo in real time. His brain was working faster than should be possible, finding new paths to the same destination. It was like watching someone speak fluent Chinese and English simultaneously. No, it was like watching someone invent a third language in the moment and speak that instead. The other band members were experiencing their own version of shock. Drummer Jamie Oldacker nearly lost the beat when he realized what was happening. Keyboardist Dick Sims actually stopped playing for a full measure, then scrambled to catch up. They all knew what broken strings meant. They all knew the solo should have stopped. But Clapton's face showed nothing. No panic, no frustration, not even concentration. He looked almost serene, like he was in a meditative state. His eyes were closed. The broken string dangling from his guitar might as well not have existed. He was somewhere else entirely, someplace where physical limitations didn't matter. The solo was building to its climax. This is where the high E string is most crucial, where Clapton normally played the highest, most emotional notes, the notes that made crowds scream, the notes that defined the song. How was he going to play those notes without that string? The answer was pure genius. He played them an octave lower, but with such ferocity and emotional intensity that they sounded higher. He bent notes that weren't supposed to be bent, squeezed emotion out of strings that didn't think they had that emotion to give. He was rewriting physics and music theory simultaneously. The final note of the solo rang out, a sustained, vibrato-heavy note that seemed to go on forever. Clapton held it, his hand shaking with the vibrato, his face finally showing strain. This was the hardest note to hold without that E string. He was pushing the B string to its absolute limit, bending it farther than strings are designed to bend. The note sustained. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. The crowd was holding its breath. 15 seconds. 20. And then Clapton released it, his hand falling away from the guitar, and he stepped back from the microphone as the band drove the song to its conclusion. For a moment, there was absolute silence, 20,000 people trying to process what they'd just witnessed. It wasn't applause time yet, the song wasn't quite over, but nobody could hold back anymore. The arena erupted, not with regular concert applause, with something primal. People were screaming, crying, standing on their seats. Hardened music critics were on their feet, their notebooks forgotten. The guy in the sound booth was slumped in his chair, shaking his head in disbelief. And backstage, George Harrison was standing perfectly still, staring at nothing. When Clapton walked off stage after the encore, Harrison was waiting for him. Harrison was soaked with sweat, his hands shaking from exertion. He was holding Brownie by the neck, the broken string still dangling pathetically. Harrison looked at him for a long moment. Then he said one word, "How?" Clapton managed a tired smile. "I don't know, George. I honestly don't know."
That solo is written for 6 strings. The math doesn't work. The positions don't work. What you just did isn't possible. Clapton looked down at his guitar, at the broken string. It was either that or stop the show. And George, I've stopped too many shows in my life. I've walked off too many stages high or drunk or just broken. Tonight, I had to finish. I had to prove I could still do this. Harrison grabbed his friend's shoulder. You didn't just finish. You played it better than I've ever heard it. The studio version, the live album, everything. That was the definitive Layla solo, with 5 strings. Word of what happened spread through the music world like wildfire. By the next morning, every guitarist in New York knew about it. The engineer who'd screamed, "Stop the show," was telling the story to anyone who would listen. "I've worked with everyone," he said. "Hendrix, Page, Beck. But what Clapton did that night, I've never seen anything like it. I don't think I ever will again." Within a week, it was the talk of guitar shops across America. Store owners reported that sales of Fender Stratocasters spiked by 40%. Everyone wanted to play the same guitar Clapton had used to perform his miracle. Guitar teachers were being asked, "Can you teach me to play with 5 strings?" The answer was always the same: not the way Clapton did it. Within a month, it was being taught in music schools as an example of advanced improvisation and problem solving. Berklee College of Music added a section to their curriculum specifically analyzing that performance. The lesson wasn't just about guitar technique, it was about grace under pressure, about thinking clearly when chaos erupts, about the difference between knowing how to play and truly mastering your instrument. Rolling Stone magazine ran a small piece about the incident 2 months later. The headline read, "Did Clapton pull off the impossible?" But by then, enough musicians had been there, had seen it with their own eyes, that it wasn't really a question anymore. He absolutely had. Jimmy Page called Clapton after reading the article. "I heard what happened at the Garden," Page said. "Tell me you're exaggerating. Tell me you stopped and changed the string." Clapton laughed. "I wish I was exaggerating, Jimmy, but I couldn't stop, not that night." "I've had strings break mid-solo," Page admitted. "I always stopped. Every guitarist stops. How did you even—" "I don't know," Clapton interrupted. "I really don't. My hands just found a way." There was a long pause on the line. Then Page said, "That's the difference between us and you, Eric. We're guitarists.
you're something else entirely. The bootleg recording of that night's performance became one of the most sought-after live recordings in rock history. Guitar magazines would analyze it note by note, trying to figure out exactly how Clapton rerouted the solo. Music theory professors used it as a case study in real-time composition. But here's what made the story legendary beyond just the technical achievement. Nobody except the people at that show knew it had happened. Clapton didn't talk about it in interviews. It wasn't mentioned in reviews. There was no dramatic mid-show announcement. If you only heard the audio recording, you'd never know a string was broken. Clapton had pulled off the impossible, and he'd done it so smoothly that most of the audience didn't even realize something had gone wrong. That's not just skill, that's mastery at a level that transcends explanation.
A few months later, a young guitarist approached Clapton after a show in London. "Mr. Clapton, I was at Madison Square Garden when your string broke during Layla. I've been trying to figure out how you did it. Can you teach me?" Clapton thought for a moment, then said something that revealed his entire philosophy. "I can't teach you how I did it, because I don't fully know myself. My brain and hands just reacted. But I can tell you why I was able to do it, because I've played that solo 10,000 times. I know it so deeply that when one path was blocked, my hands found another path instinctively. Mastery isn't about perfection, it's about knowing something so completely that you can rebuild it from memory when it breaks." That broken string incident became part of Clapton's legend. It's whispered about in guitar shops. It's the story older guitarists tell younger ones when they're complaining about equipment problems. Did you hear about the time Clapton's string broke during Layla? Brownie, the guitar with the broken string, was eventually retired from touring. It sits now in a private collection, and that broken string was never replaced. It remains there as a physical reminder of the night Eric Clapton did something impossible. Years later, when asked about his greatest achievement as a guitarist, Clapton didn't mention any of his hit songs or his Grammy Awards. He mentioned that night. "That was the moment I realized I'd transcended technique. I wasn't thinking about what my hands should do, they just knew. That's when I understood what Slowhand really meant. Not slow playing, but absolute control. The confidence to play without rushing, even when everything is falling apart." The story of the broken string reminds us that true mastery isn't about playing perfectly when everything goes right. It's about what you do when everything goes wrong. It's about the moment when muscle memory, deep knowledge, and pure instinct combine to create something that shouldn't exist. Eric Clapton didn't just finish a solo with a broken string that night. He proved that the limitations of instruments, of physics, of what should be possible don't matter when you know your craft deeply enough. That's not just being a great guitarist, that's why they called him God. And on one hot July night in Madison Square Garden, with 20,000 witnesses and one less string than he needed, Eric Clapton proved they were right.